In this video, I'm going to cover how to create old, damaged cinder blocks entirely in Substance Painter. And we'll do this with the use of standard materials and a brick generator mask that allows you to create the cinder block or brick style effect. And we'll build this up layer by layer, completely from scratch, so there's no need to go into Substance Designer or Sampler. And this tutorial is part 2 of the cinder block creation. And in part 1, I showed you how to create clean painted cinder blocks from scratch, layer by layer. And this tutorial expands on that with the use of standard materials. So let's begin. Before we get started, if you're looking to learn Substance Painter completely from scratch and you want to learn everything to get started to texture new meshes, I created an in-depth tutorial course that will show you everything you need to know in only 6 hours across 23 videos in Substance 3D Painter Essentials. The course is available right now for you to pick up, to watch, and to learn. And now, onto the tutorial. First things first is the tiling plane setup I have. This is a tiling plane that's 3x3 quads, with each quad 300 by 300 units. Quads are overlapping inside 0 to 1 space, and it allows you to test your tiling textures in Painter. If you want to see this setup and how I created this and imported and what I'm using for the mannequin, in order to judge scale, I have a tutorial on how to create tiling textures, and I show you this process or how I brought this in. And this is what I'm going to use in this tutorial to test the tiling of the cinder blocks. Let me go ahead and disable the wireframe. I'm going to go to display settings, scroll all the way down and show mesh wireframe, and I'm just going to turn that off. The first thing is let's set up the brick generator, the mask that we're going to use, so we can apply the different materials and then mask them out, the grout and then the brick. And we need to create that brick generator mask so we can use it. I'm going to make sure that I have the tiling plane texture set selected because this has 2 meshes, one for the tiling plane and one for the mannequin. I need to make sure that I'm working within the right texture set list. Usually don't have to worry about it. If you only have a tiling plane, you will have 1 texture set. And in my case, I have 2 because I have 2 meshes. So just a little side note that I'm working within the right texture set list. So let's create a fill layer and let's name it brick generator mask. And within that fill layer, I'm going to right click on it and create a black mask. And inside this black mask is where we'll apply fill effects and filters to generate that brick repetition. I'm going to right click on the black mask and we're going to add a fill effect. Add fill. And inside this fill effect is where we can apply a grayscale texture to properties, which is going to be a brick generator texture that comes with Painter. If you left click on the grayscale, you can search for brick. And it will be this one right here. So I'm going to select it. And that's applied. We're not going to be able to see our brick mask because we need to change over to see the mask being displayed. And right now we are using the material property. So to see the mask and what it's doing, let's go ahead and view the display of the mask so we can tweak the properties for the brick generator. So I'm going to use this drop down menu and select mask. And let me zoom in. I'm going to use the scale mannequin I have in order to judge the scale of each of the cinder blocks. And this is why I like using the mannequin, the human scale reference, so I can determine the default repetition size of the bricks. So with the brick generator fill effect selected, let's go to the properties. I'm going to scroll down and I'm going to open up the pattern section. This is a procedural texture and you can adjust the properties for how these bricks will appear. There are quite a lot of properties here. So I'm just going to go through and change the ones I already know. I already tested these, so you don't have to see me tweak these in real time. But you can play around with these values and determine the size of each cinder block and how you'd want to have this look. So I'm going to change the repetition of the brick X and Y. So brick X, I'm going to set it to 7, and brick Y, I'm going to set it to 12. These are the same exact values I used in the clean painted cinder block tutorial. And this provides pretty good real size cinder block shape. For bevel, I'm going to change bevel X and bevel Y both to 0.02. I don't need that softness around the edges, and I want a little bit more hard edge, like so. And then for gap, we want to have a little bit more of a gap between each of the cinder blocks. I'm going to change gap X and Y to 0.03 for both. And let's zoom in, and this is what it's going to look like. And everything else I'm going to keep the same. But again, mess around with these and see what you can come up with for the result that you would want. Next step is I want to break up these straight lines. Just like we did for the clean painted cinder blocks in the first tutorial, we want to use the same effect. and this is going to be a filter. These are going to be more old damaged cinder blocks, so we're going to need to break these up a lot more than we did before. So I'm going to right click on the black mask, and in this case we're not going to create a fill effect, but we're going to create a filter right here. So it's going to add an empty filter container right above brick generator, and then in the properties select the filter, and we're looking for blur slope. Blur slope allows you to input a custom grunge texture, which is available with Painter, to break up those edges. So let's select it, and you can see it's already working. We can adjust the properties here now, but I want to use my own custom grunge texture. So let's open up the source parameters, and under source type, default noise, let's choose custom noise, and then scroll down and you have custom noise image that you can input. So let's select it and look for grunge texture. Any grunge texture will work, and you just simply search for one that you want to use, apply it, and you'll see the effect of it. You'll just need to simply lower the intensity so it applies more to the edges and not the entire image. That way it breaks up those straight lines. However, I want to use a different custom noise image, and I already went through a dozen of these and picked out the right one, and the one I want to use, the one that I like with the effect that it creates, is Clouds 2, this one right here. So I'm going to apply it. We're not going to see the effect of it, so let's change some of the properties for it. I want to change the intensity, like so. So I'm going to adjust it until I like what I see, and the value that I like is 0.1. And I'm going to change the blend mode. You can mess around with the blend mode. It's set to blur at the moment. You can set minimum or maximum, and it'll just give you a different effect for the blend mode for that grunge texture. I'm going to set it to minimum. You can also begin to stack multiple of these blur modes on top to break this up even further and create more of a procedural effect. So if I copy this, you can right click on the blur. So instead of creating a brand new filter and reapplying everything, you can copy it and you just change the grunge texture. And this way you begin to stack multiple of these filters on top. So I'm going to right click on it. You can choose Control C to copy, and then Control V to paste, or right click and choose paste. So then select the blur slope, the second one, and simply change the grunge. Let's try Cloud 3. You can see that it's breaking things up even more. I'm going to adjust the intensity and lower this. So let's do 0.05, and you can disable and enable and see what it's doing. Might be too much, but you can see how it stacks on top, and just tweak the properties, maybe change the custom noise to something else, and find exactly what you're looking for to break up those edges even further. Let's lower this a little bit, 0.03. Now you can call this done, and then we can begin to add in the standard materials to see how they look. I'm going to push this a little bit further, and then we'll work with the grout and the brick texture using the standard materials. So I'm going to create this entire effect first, and then we'll work with everything else. So what I'm going to do next is I want to apply a little bit of a contrast and luminosity to kind of sharpen these a little bit more and kind of tighten it maybe. So I'm going to create a new filter by right clicking on the black mask and create a new filter, and then choose a new filter called contrast, this one right here. And it allows you to kind of sharpen and create more contrast around those edges for your black mask. So here's before, after, just tighten them up a little bit more. And next, let's create an anchor point. So what an anchor point will do is we'll create a reference point for using this mask, all these effects in any of the folders and for any of the layers. So instead of having to recreate the stack for different materials that we're going to be using, you simply create a reference point, an anchor, and then call upon the anchor to use this mask anywhere within the layer stack. So you create it once and then reuse this effect simply by referencing an anchor point. So to do this, we are simply going to right click on the black mask and create add anchor point. And it'll simply use the name of the layer as its anchor point name. And actually, let me rename it. Just double click on the name, brick generator mask anchor. So here is our mask for the cinder blocks. Next, we need to create the grout and the cinder block materials to use. So let's come over to the layers. I'm going to create a new folder because we want to contain the grout and the brick within their own folders. It'll make it easier for us to use the anchor. So I'm going to create a folder, and let's switch over back from base color or from the mask to material. And let's rename this folder to grout. Let's search for a standard material, which is going to be this first icon, and look for concrete. There are a few concrete textures to use, and I'm going to use these two right here, concrete cast and concrete coarse. So the coarse is the one that we're going to use for the grout. So I'm simply going to take this coarse standard material, left click, hold and drag and apply it onto a plane. And let's make sure that it's inside this grout folder. So I'm going to drag it into this folder, like so. And then let's create a brand new folder. Make sure we are outside this folder. And this folder is going to be brick or cinder block. And for the cinder block, for the brick, I'm going to use concrete cast. I'm going to left click, hold and drag and drop it onto the plane. And again, I want to make sure that it's inside this folder. So I'm going to reposition it. So now we have brick folder with a concrete cast inside it as a material. And then grout folder with a concrete coarse material inside it. Both are now being applied to the plane. And now we can use the anchor points that we created in order to reference this entire layer stack and then mask out where the grout is going to appear and where the brick, the cinder blocks are going to appear. This is the power of using anchor points. So let's do the brick first. I'm going to right click on the folder and choose black mask. And then into the black mask, I'm going to right click on that icon and choose add fill. In the properties, choose grayscale, switch over to anchor points and use this brick generator anchor point that we created. It's going to reference and call upon this brick generator mask we created. And you can see we're now masking out the cinder blocks. And we're doing this to the entire folder and everything that's going to be contained within this brick folder. And let's do the same thing for the grout. I'm going to select this folder icon for the grout, right click, create a black mask, right click on it again, choose a fill effect. And in the fill properties, under grayscale, we're going to apply the anchor point for the grout. For the grout itself, we actually need to invert the black mask. Because right now it's applying to the bricks the same way that the brick anchor point is also applying to the bricks. So for the grout, we need to invert that fill effect for the anchor point. And you can easily do so by selecting that fill effect for the grout, coming down to the properties. You can see that we're applying our anchor point to it and open up the levels and choose invert. So now you can see we are using two materials and the anchor points, one inverted for the grout and one standard, just regular anchor point. And we are masking between the cinder block material, which is concrete cast, and then the concrete coarse material, which is for the grout. And this is how you effectively use the anchor points you created and call upon them for individual folders. And all the layers are going to be contained within those folders. And you can even go down into the brick generator mask and tweak any of these properties and that will propagate into these anchor points into these folders and adjust how that black mask for the brick for the cinder blocks will look. Our next step is to adjust the material and build up each layer to how we want the cinder blocks to look as well as how we want the grout to look. Let's focus on the brick first. I'm going to select the folder for the brick, for the cinder blocks, and then choose the concrete cast material and go through its properties. Let's adjust the color. Let's adjust the roughness. I don't want this to be so shiny. This is an old damaged cinder block, so it's going to be less shiny. So that means we're going to increase the concrete roughness. Let's do 0.75. Just move the light. You can see that it's more dull. It's not going to reflect much light. You have concrete roughness variation. I'll leave that at default. You have some cracks spreads. I'm not going to use this. It's a little bit too aggressive. I'll keep it at 0. And we can do some concrete color variation. So let's zoom out, take a look, and let's actually bring that down to 0.2. The grout is very shiny. We'll tweak that in a moment, but the brick itself looks pretty good. We need to have the cinder blocks protruded a little bit further, extruded out from the grout. Right now they're too flat. This is a tile material. This is a flat texture, so we're going to use height property, which will translate to a normal map texture detail. So we're going to give that illusion of the cinder blocks being moved forward. And the way we do that is by creating a new fill layer above the concrete cast. Let's name this brick height. And for the channels, we only want height. So I'm going to disable everything but height channel information. And now we can adjust the height by increasing the height value. You can see that it's moving the brick forward, like so. Let's do 0.15. Next, let's add some brick color variation, some dirt. Right now they're a little bit too clean. So for this, we're going to create a brand new layer, fill layer, and I'm going to disable everything but the color. We could probably also work with roughness to create a bit of roughness variation. So let's go ahead and actually enable color and roughness. So we have two channel information here. And let's rename it to color dirt variation. I'm going to right click on this color dirt variation and create a black mask. So we effectively hide that information. And then I'm going to right click on the black mask and add a fill. And in the fill, we're going to use a grunge texture to kind of break up that color and dirt variation with the default concrete color. Select a grayscale and search for grunge, for any grunge texture. I already have one in mind, and it's grunge pebbles dirt. And again, I just went through dozens of these and chose the best one. So this way you don't have to watch me choose one in real time, look for one. So I'm going to search for grunge pebble dirt, this one right here. And I'm going to load that up. And you can see that it's creating a bit of that color breakup. We can adjust the balance and the contrast for this, as well as the color, original fill layer. Let's select that and then make it darker instead of that light gray, something like this. And we effectively kind of broken up the color a bit more right about there. So here's before, here's after, much better. And we can also adjust the roughness by increasing the roughness, because 0.3 for the fill layer for the color dirt variation, that's shiny. You can see that it's shining, and actually I want to increase it to like 0.9. Dirt is not very shiny and it's more dull, and it'll just also create a bit of a roughness variation from the cinder block, which is 0.7, to the dirt, which is 0.9. All right, and I think that looks pretty good. Again, you can continue adjusting these. Maybe let's make it a little brighter to fit your concrete cinder block that you are going for. And as far as the brick goes, I think we're gonna be done. We need to make a few adjustments to the mask. I don't like how pixelated this looks, so we'll do something after we've adjusted the grout. But yeah, we do need to do something with this type of effect. It does not look very good. Next, let's tweak the grout, and then we'll come back and adjust the black mask for the cinder blocks. So let me close this folder so it's a little more organized so we know what we're looking at. Let's go to the grout folder, and let's select the concrete course, which is the grout material, and adjust properties for it. Let's make it less yellow, more, a little brighter, like so, and more gray. Then let's adjust the color variation, so it has a bit of a breakup. Let's increase the tiling. Right now the tiling of this material is too big, and we want that fine, small grout detail, those tiny little small cracks and holes. So let's come up to the tiling, and let's go up to 5, something like that. It's a little bit too noisy, so let's turn down that damage intensity. Something like that, so it's a little bit more smoother, and also maybe decrease the damage scale. Yeah, let's decrease it like this. Let's zoom out. That's maybe a little bit too much still. Let's go 0.5 for this, and damage intensity maybe 0.1. Concrete roughness, we're gonna increase it to, let me take a look at the light. So it's a little bit too shiny. Let's go 0.75, like so. And let's move the light. Let's come back to the brick, and now that I'm rotating the light, let's make the brick a little bit more darker. So I'm gonna come into the brick concrete material, and let's make that brick darker, like so. Much better. So now we have a bit of separation between the grout and the cinder blocks. And then now we can maybe even tone down and make the base color for the dirt a little darker, like so. So you can see you will never work with one individual folder or layer. You'll always be going back and forth to make adjustments, because everything gets built on top of each other and everything affects each other. Now let's come back to the grout and work with that a little bit more. Again, just continue going through the properties and adjusting to exactly what you would want to see. Maybe more damage intensity, just a little bit. We can also apply the same idea for the color dirt variation into the grout. We do have concrete color variation, so maybe we can increase that. Gonna give that a bit more of the darkness and the lightness for the grout. So I think that looks pretty good. But we could do the same setup we did for the brick by adding the same idea for color and dirt variation in order to break that variation a lot more and add maybe even more dirt into it. But I think at this point you get the idea. Just continue tweaking and adjusting and adding fill layers with different grunge maps can go a long way. So I think I like how this looks. We went from too clean now to a lot more variation for the cinder block as well as for the grout. So I'm gonna call it done for both of these layers. The last thing I want to show you is go back to your mask for the brick generator and tweak a bit more properties, because now we get a bit of that pixelated look on the corners, and we need to tweak that. So going back into your brick generator mask, and you can see that it's actually the blur slope that kind of creates that little effect. So we can disable one of the blur slopes and maybe not use it. However, I could probably fix it by applying a new filter on it and maybe blurring it a little bit. So let me try. I'm gonna above blur slope. I'm gonna create a new filter. So I'm gonna right click on the black mask, add a filter. And actually, I'm gonna drag it down below contrast luminosity because I want that contrast luminosity to be on top. But we'll enable and disable that layer just to see what effect that it creates. Maybe we'll drag it on top. And for this empty filter, I'm going to use blur. And it's going to be a regular blur. And let's come into the properties, into the parameters, and lower the blur intensity. So here's the default without it. And by blurring, it blurs those edges a little bit more. And it gets rid of that nasty looking pixelated noise that it had. So let's do 0.12. Let's do before, after. So that works much better. And maybe we can adjust the contrast luminosity for this. Yeah, maybe a little bit. Let's do before and after again. Yeah, much better. Just kind of sharpens it. So we created the blur effect, and I think that works. And again, just by going through the layers, enable and disable, you might have to go into the blur slope and maybe adjust some of the properties here, the intensity of each of the blur slope and the grunge texture being used. So go through and adjust it effect by effect, filter by filter to tweak the final look. So at this point, I'm going to do one last thing to show you how to sharpen your entire texture and how to export it. But you have now a lot of control for each of the properties for the black mask that you can adjust and tweak further. Tweak and adjust further for the grout, as well as maybe introducing additional fill effects and grunge textures to break up that repetition or maybe create some more dirt and color variation. And then you can adjust further how the brick itself looks, as well as for the color and the dirt variation that you have on top, the brick height, maybe increasing it, push that out more, as well as the concrete cast material and all of its default properties that are available to you. Let's create a filter that's going to sharpen your entire texture. So at some point, but when you work on it, you may need to sharpen everything at the very last step before you export to add a little bit more fidelity, a little bit more sharpness to your textures. And the way you do that is to use a sharpen filter. And you do this at the top of everything else, on top of all the layers. So create an empty layer, not a fill layer, but right next to it you have add layer, which is an empty layer. And then let's rename it, sharpen. Then into that empty layer, right click on it and add a filter. Into this filter, search for sharpen and add the sharpen filter. This one right here. When you apply it, nothing will change before and after. That means you need to go back to the empty layer itself and make that layer the blend mode from normal to pass through. As soon as you do that, you can see that it sharpens the texture. Select the sharpen filter and adjust the intensity. So the default value of 1 might be too much, so just lower it to the amount that you would want. And just enable and disable before and after. So it creates a more sharpening effect, and it looks pretty good. And for the last step, once you are done creating your cinder block old damage texture, is to export it for whatever software, game engine, or renderer you'd want to use these textures for. To do this, go to File, Export Textures. Under Output Template, use the drop-down menu and choose what you're going to be using these textures for. In my case, I am using it in Unreal Engine 4. This works for Unreal Engine 5. Packed. Packed means that it will take a roughness texture, metallic, and ambient occlusion and pack it into a single texture into each individual channel. So it gives you one texture with 3 value information into one. It saves space and memory. And then you get to choose each channel and you plug it into roughness, metallic, and ambient occlusion of the material. Define the output directory. Where do you want to save these textures into? So I already have my output directory defined. By simply left click on it and navigate, so you know where these textures are being saved into. File type, PNG, 8-bit, and size based on the texture set size, which is 2K texture right here. That's what we've been working with, and that's what the resolution of the saved textures are going to be. But you can change it to anything you want here if you want to lower it or increase it. Since I have 2 texture sets, one for the mannequin, which is only used for scale reference, and one for the talon plane, I've disabled the mannequin, so this is nothing gets exported, no textures get exported for this, since we don't need that, and I have talon plane selected. The textures are going to be exported only for the talon plane. And by selecting this, you can see what the final export parameters are. We just defined them here. And then what the output maps are going to be. You have color, you have metallic, ambient occlusion and roughness packed into a single texture, and you have your normal map. This material does not have any emissive property, So I went ahead and disabled it. But if I had it enabled, nothing would get exported because we do not have any emissive channels being used. And once you've defined all the parameters, click export and your textures will be exported. And to check, here are our 3 exported textures. Here's our color map, normal map, and roughness, ambient occlusion, and metallic packed into a single texture, into individual RGB channels. And that is it. This is how you create a cinder block texture that is old and damaged, and all the effects that you can apply on top of it to make it look exactly how you'd want, entirely in Substance Painter. If you enjoyed this tutorial, I have a more in-depth, extensive course on how to use Substance 3D Painter completely from scratch. It will show you everything you need to know to get started with Substance Painter in just 6 hours and across 23 videos. The course is called Substance 3D Painter Essentials. It's available right now, and you can begin to learn how to texture with Painter. And I'll see you in there.